right, good evening, everybody. Good evening. First of all, I have to say it is amazing to see our students live and in person. The energy is awesome, so welcome. We are now going, in following with YU protocol, we are now going to take off our masks. It's the big reveal.
No, not you, only us.
Right. So good evening to those that are physically here and virtually on the live stream. My name is Moshe Bellows, and we would like to welcome you to the Syms School of Business Maccabee Ventures Evening of Dialogue with Michael Eisenberg of Aleph and Bruce Taragin of Blumberg Capital. As we start, I would like to particularly thank Jonah Laskov and Emily Kaplan for putting this evening together. Jonah is a student, and if you look around, he put the majority of this together logistically. So thank you, Jonah. For those of you joining us in the room as well as live streaming, you might be new to Yeshiva University, or for those of you that haven't checked in a couple of years, we are excited and gratified to share that YU has created a forward-thinking, thriving technology ecosystem under the leadership of Dr. Noam Wasserman, the Dean of Syms, and his colleague, Michael Strauss, who ideated and launched this vibrant ecosystem, which includes many of our colleagues that I see in the audience and on live stream. Dr. Sharon Poxter is here. She's the Chair of Strategy and Entrepreneurship. Dr. Maria Blecker is the Director of YU's Innovation Lab. Mark Finkel, who's the Dean of the MBA program and teaches entrepreneurship. Laser Kornwasser, who teaches leadership. And Dr. Moses Pava, the Director of the Syms School of Business Honors and Entrepreneurial Leadership program. And the rest of our colleagues, we thank you so much for bringing this incredible ecosystem to life. Apropos to this evening, there is also a mini venture capital track. Bruce and I teach angel and venture capital investing, as well as fund management and administration, giving students a year of venture capital experience while still in school. Plus, we have launched Maccabee Ventures, an early-stage venture fund, separate but affiliated with YU, allowing students, like many in our audience, to gain even more experience as venture analysts at a true venture fund. We welcome alumni and founders and VCs to check out our portfolio at maccabee.vc and see how we can be value add to you or how you can be value add to us. But most of all, alumni, everyone here and everyone watching, we encourage you to get involved in the ecosystem. By the numbers, Yeshiva University now boasts hundreds of computer science, data analytics, business intelligence, marketing, and finance majors. And YU has a host of master's and graduate programs in the CATS Graduate School, including artificial intelligence, biotech management and analytics, cybersecurity, digital marketing, math, and way more coming hot off the press, more than I can keep track with, thanks to Dean Wasserman and our colleagues. So thank you so much. And all these initiatives are serviced by the new Shevet Glaubach Career Center. So if you are an employer, you should really avail yourselves to the YU's skilled up students that are in this audience. Let's hear it for them. We invite everyone to learn more about the thriving tech ecosystem here at YU. And now, in keeping with our mantra of giving our students considerable practical experience and responsibility, we've invited 3 students to introduce tonight's panel.
My name is Jake Schechter. I'm a senior at the Syms School of Business with a majoring in entrepreneurship. Moshe Bellows is the managing principal of Maccabee Ventures, bringing over 25 years of experience as an entrepreneur, strategic angel investor, and collaborative trusted advisor to early-stage tech companies across multiple industries. These industries include digital health, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, fintech, and silver tech, a term coined and trademarked by Moshe, representing the core union between seniors and technology. Moshe earned his BA from Yeshiva University and a Juris Doctor from Fordham University School of Law. Moshe also was awarded the Social Entrepreneurship Award from NYU Stern School of Business. And when Moshe is not working with VCs or sitting on the boards of numerous companies, you can find him devoting his time and his resources to several nonprofits, including but not limited to APAC Venture Tech and Project Extreme, as well as starring in movies such as Boiler Room alongside actors Ben Affleck and Vin Diesel. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Moshe Bellows.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sylvia Slager. I am a senior at Yeshiva College studying economics and psychology, and it's my honor to introduce Michael Eisenberg, who, as many of you know, is a general partner at Aleph VC. Aleph VC is an equal partnership early stage VC in Israel that has invested in over 40 companies. Michael has spent time on many other VCs before Aleph and has sat on many prestigious boards, including WeWork and Lemonade, as well as Nexar. Since we are here, it's also important to mention that Michael is a graduate of Yeshiva University studying political science and was the editor-in-chief of The Commentator. On top of a super busy job, Michael's also an avid writer. He has published 7 books, continuously publishes in very prestigious publications, and has an active blog called 6 Kids and a Full-Time Job. However, since the blog was started in 2006, it's slightly out of date, as he now has 8 kids, 3 grandkids, a full-time job, and lives happily in Jerusalem, and somehow manages to balance all of that. So, welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Buonasera a tutti. Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Dale. I'm from Milan, Italy. I have the honor to introduce tonight one of our speakers, Professor Moshe Bellows, who is also one of my professors. Oh, sorry. I was looking at you. I'm so sorry. I meant... I'm so sorry. Professor Bruce Taragin. Sorry for that. Native of New York, Bruce majored in finance and communication, cum laude, at Yeshiva University and got his MBA and JD in Fordham University. Bruce is the co-founder and general partner at Maccabee Ventures and is also the GP at Blumberg Capital. On top of that, he's also the general partner of many other companies. Prior to joining Blumberg Capital in 1998, Bruce co-founded and held several senior managers in tech companies. He's also on the board and involved with the Jewish community found in North California. Bruce's core values are transparency, integrity, and being entrepreneur-friendly, which is the best advice he's giving to his students. In fact, one of his best quotes and best life lesson he could give you is not what you say, it's how you say it and how you present it. And that's one of the advices he keeps giving us every class. I'm looking forward to hearing from our professors and our speakers tonight. Thank you so much. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Let's give it up for our students. Thank you. Okay, now I hold in my hand questions that were culled from our students, and
I feel like we're in the dating game. It's like
let's see how it pans out
with the index cards. Well, you have 8 kids, so I think you're good. You're good.
Okay. Part of your job as an investor is to predict and understand trends that will define the future, where the market will be in 5 to 10 years from now. When the pandemic challenged so many of our perceived orders, which have been used for decades, how did you adjust your investment or investment thesis, or did you? Bruce.
Okay. First off, it's great to be here. Amazing introductions from all three of you. A+ for this evening's intros. And it's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and friends. And thank you for everyone who's coordinated to put the event together. Maybe I would start, Moshe, I think, by just setting a macro point to give perspective for everyone in the room in case folks maybe don't have an appreciation for the nuance. But this year, in 2021 to date, venture capital firms have raised almost $100 billion, and they're on track to actually invest about $100 billion into startups in the US ecosystem. One of the terms we've touched on in class a lot, we talk about is fintech, financial technology innovation. Just in fintech, so far this year to date, folks have invested about $40 billion. So I think that's about double from last year. So while on the one hand there's this pandemic going on, globally, which has impacted all of us, obviously, on the other hand, it seems to be that, venture capital and investing in technology has just moving at a very rapid pace. And just for Michael, obviously, and he can talk more locally, but we have an office in Tel Aviv as well. Israel's also on track this year. They've already invested year to date about $7.5 billion. Invested in startups this year, on track to hit about $10 billion. Also on track for about double, from the pace of last year. And I guess I'm proud to promote one of our companies was one of the largest rounds this year, a company called Yotpo out of Israel, raised $230 million. That was led by Bessemer and a number of other groups. And so I think on the one hand, Moshe, to frame your question, it's kind of maybe it was the best of times, it was the worst of times on a certain scale. And for us, and then I'll pass to Michael, but I think from our perspective, our investment thesis really that we've been investing in for the past few decades has seen massive acceleration as a result of this new world that we live in. We've always talked about really the migration from offline to online to mobile, and this proliferation at a very high level of kind of big data meets AI, machine learning, deep learning. The convergence of those two things have really moved now to transform industries, globally. And so many of our companies have doubled, tripled, quadrupled over the last year or two. I mean, unfortunately, it's difficult, but this migration from, this trend, e-commerce, cybersecurity, supply chain logistics, moving online, digital health, contactless payments, all these different areas that we've been actively investing in for a few decades have just seen massive acceleration. So, of course, it's been challenging, and there's, transformation going on globally, but there's definitely opportunity, and I think that's why you're seeing this kind of investment pace that's unprecedented.
Michael?
Let me just echo Bruce's comments. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. It's actually hard for me to imagine as a YU graduate that there would be over 100 people and other people online listening to anything about technology or entrepreneurship. This certainly would have happened when I graduated YU some 30 years ago, and I don't think even, I gave a talk in this room, I think it's now 5 years ago, there were 30 women here. That was it. And so kudos to all of you. It's quite amazing. Really quite amazing. I don't have that much to add to what Bruce said. Just keep moving up. One, we didn't change anything, and probably won't change anything. It's hard to teach old dogs new tricks. The only thing that has happened, in my view, is we've accelerated digitization by a decade. And now we've accelerated digitization by a decade, but it's become inherently global. Zoom kind of caused time and space to disappear, and we've also time shifted a whole bunch of things digitally. In the same way we used to time shift what you watched on television, now you can time shift almost anything. And a large swath of the global population became facile with digital tools, also accelerating that, and that enables you to drive more technology into their hands. So whatever was happening before is now happening much faster in many more places in the world simultaneously. And that's a dynamic I've been doing this 25 years, you've never seen before. And so it's hard to know where this all kind of lands. The one thing I will say on that is I think if you are a legacy company, you ought to be really worried right now, because this is overwhelming absolutely everything. And you ought to be super worried.
Thank you. So zooming in a little bit now, people talk a lot about what makes a good founder or a great founder. Tech, industry experience, ability to recruit a team. When you meet founders, what leads you to decide if you should invest in them? We'll start with Michael. And as a corollary, do you feel that entrepreneurs are born or bred?
I don't know the answer to the second question. It's always a combination of born and life circumstances. So, I don't know. The two most important characteristics, in my opinion, I wrote a blog post about this, I think about a decade ago, are resilience and optimism. And it's important to kind of dial in on those. So resilience is, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a really good idea and it's got legs, odds are that very few people have thought about it. Because if they would have thought about it, they would have done it themselves. And we have a natural bias to think, how should I say, less well of things that we didn't think about ourselves. We all have some form of non-invented here syndrome. So if you're an entrepreneur, you turn up with a new idea, odds are you're going to hear, that's dumb, that's silly, no, I will not invest in that, no, I will not buy your product, no, it's not interesting, and by the way, it's not that new either. And so you require the resilience to kind of push through this. And the second thing is, all the entrepreneurs I know that are really successful are optimistic about the future, and they're optimistic about technology's ability to shape the future and how you harness technology to do that. And so if you don't think the future can be better, you probably are not an entrepreneur. You should be a journalist. And those are the two most important traits. And the last
Are there any journalists in the room?
There are going to be a lot after tonight.
and pessimists write headlines, optimists own the future. And the last thing I'll say on that is you have to have burning curiosity. Because you have to, my partners at Benchmark had this line, be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. And so to be a learn-it-all, you need to be curious all the time. And okay, how can I do this better? How can I do this better? Can I get to this person? Can I get to that person? Can I recruit this person? What do I think about them? I had a conversation with my CEOs today. He said, I'm going to make 10 reference calls on this candidate. I said, 10? 10? He said, yeah, I want to understand her from every aspect. I found people from different times of her life to ask different questions to. I don't know why he needs to talk to 10 people, but I'm impressed that he wants to talk to 10 people. So, that curiosity is important.
Sure, and I agree with what Michael said, although 10 does sound like an awful lot. But I'm guessing most of you in the room are probably too young to know or remember Jack Welch. He was the CEO of GE, and hopefully everyone in our class that Moshe and I teach know about the 6 T's, so I don't have to regurgitate the 6 T's. And when we've written a ton of blogs at BlumbergCapital.com, if you want to go check out some of those concepts around the 6 T's that are touching on Moshe's question. So what I would add, though, is, and I think his book, Jack Welch's book, was called From the Gut, and he passed away actually last year. He was really a prolific CEO from like about 1980 till about 2000, ran GE, unprecedented performance there. And he used to talk about the 4 E's, which I'll probably get it wrong right now, but I think it was about, edge and energy, and then the ability to really educate and create enthusiasm for, your team. And then he used to say, wrap those 4 E's with a P, and the P was for passion. So I think Jack Welch really said it well in that regard for what we try to find, and it is challenging. And what I would say, and similar to probably Michael and Moshe for that matter, we've all been doing this for a few decades. Our minds are kind of these machine learning engines, and it's a pattern recognition business. And having looked at probably in excess of 50,000 companies over the course of my career, you just hopefully start to get a little sense of pattern of, okay, this is really exciting and makes a lot of sense, and this team's unbelievable. And so it really is much more of an art than a science.
Any red flags that you look for that would cause you not to invest in a company that stand out?
Well, so yes, I mean, again, our key job, and we've talked about this in class, is trust, but verify. So, we're from Missouri, so entrepreneurs tend to, it's all about show me, and so we have to really believe what it is that the entrepreneurs are telling us, and so it's that ability to hopefully, confirm and not get too caught up in the vision and the hype. As Michael said, entrepreneurs tend to be very optimistic. And so, historically people say, hey, cut the numbers in half. It's going to take twice as long and cost twice as much, and maybe you're close to what the reality is. Maybe. So again, it's really trust and verify. So it's, having a team of, investment professionals on our team globally and being incredibly, diligent each time we meet. I do remember we were, in the, literally about to sign documents on a transaction I was working on out in the Bay Area. It's probably about 15 years ago. And maybe to Michael's point, 10 calls is not enough, because it was probably my 10th or 15th call on the management team. And finally, someone actually got back to me, and he said, hey, the founders are kind of fraudulent. You don't want to invest with them. And again, to me, what was just touched on before is just transparency, integrity, kind of the ethic of the individual. So it was clearly a pass. It was very challenging because documents were done. We were literally just ready to sign and wire money. And I sent 2 cases of wine into that reference that came back to me and was honest. And maybe Michael could talk to it in Israel. It's really hard, let's say in Israel, to get a bad reference. They all served in the army. They all shed blood together. It's rare that they're going to throw someone under the bus. So you got to really understand and think about the questions you're going to ask and the answers you can expect, maybe reading between the lines and being really diligent enough to get to hopefully the truth of, hey, do we really want to invest and go to battle with this entrepreneur, with this team for the next 10 or 15 years, which is frequently how long these journeys take.
For what it's worth, I find the opposite is true. It's hard to get a bad reference in the U.S. because everyone's got really nice words to describe the people. In Israel, if you have a trust relationship, they'll tell you exactly what went wrong.
So you know what I think we got to do
face.
is you got to make those calls locally in Israel for me, and I'll do the calls in the U.S. for your guys, and together we'll get the truth.
Amen. Good segue to Michael. Those of us in the room that were and online that were fortunate to grow up with the underpinnings of Torah, lifestyle, and learning, we've heard time again that Torah is relevant and applicable and essential and inseparable from our daily living. Often, however, it can seem a bit dated. If my ox scores your ox, tort law, your book really brings these Torah-grounded values forward in a contemporary context of business and venture more specifically. Can you expound on your books and indeed your personal thesis, and practically, how does living a life of values increase creativity, bolster innovation, and foster greater resilience?
How long do we have for this answer? I don't. Okay, I hope I don't get myself in too much trouble. But Moshe's comment about torts and your ox scores my ox, etc., is perhaps the most frequent comment I've gotten from people about the book, and it shocked me, and it is surprising, but it shouldn't. Some woman even wrote me after a radio appearance on Nachum Siegel's radio show that she never heard somebody talk about Torah in the context of cryptocurrency or an artificial intelligence, and that's what her kids need to read. And so I think we have a problem. I think we have a real problem. We need to talk about it, which is that Torah is super relevant, and the timeless wisdom in Torah is super relevant, whether it's the issues that we're dealing with in this week's Parshiot, last week and this week, whether it's the family strife over money between Avram and Lot, whether it's Avram's handling of wealth, whether it's Yitzchak who chooses a different professional path from his father, right? He becomes a farmer. His father was a shepherd. One had mobile wealth that he could carry around. The other needed to stay put. He ran a big farm with a lot of slaves. These are super highly relevant topics. But we're having a hard time interpreting them to the fast-moving modern world. And we're having a hard time interpreting Ezer Neshech and the laws of interest and ribis to the modern world. In my third book in the series on Vayikra, I take a view of ribis that is not entirely consonant with, I think, the mainstream rabbinic view today of the way ribis is handled. But it's really crazy. So I won't loan any individual money with interest, period, full stop. No heteriska, no nothing. That is allowed by every Beis Din, basically, that I'm aware of. But I don't think that's what the Torah had in mind. By the same token, you walk into a bank, they got a heteriska on the wall, and the loan you money and usurious rates. It's terrible. That's what the Ramban calls, in my view, novel b'rshus HaTorah. But most Beis Dins allow it, but we don't talk about it. Because we don't even understand what these things are, and we haven't put them into modern terms. Not just what's a credit card, what's a cryptocurrency. Not just what's a loan to a person. If we can identify these people at a personal level, how does that impact our view of this? And so I'll finish with 2 short comments. I could talk about this all night. But we need a generation of Torah people who can talk modern technology and modern economics. So all of you learning Torah, you need to learn both sides of this. It's super important. Our kids demand it from us. I got kids your age, and they demand it from us. And the second thing is the Torah is the most important anchor by a long shot against the relativist values discussion going on in the world today. And I think that those timeless values of the Torah generate economic value, and they've worked for not centuries, but millennia. And so the Torah that we learn, the Torah that we imbibe, provided we can understand it with a modern lens, is valuable for raising families that are rooted and anchored, and they're valuable for creating wealth and understanding what to do with it, understanding what your responsibility is in the world, and having a discussion about what our responsibilities are, which is the Torah's view, of versus what our rights are, which is a modern relativist view. And so learn it seriously, it matters. And then bring the lenses you learn in these classes to that Torah so you can interpret it for the people your age.
Thank you. Agree. I think your book will be a jumping off point to some of those discussions, frankly. Bruce, you just closed Fund 5, and you have close to $1 billion under management. You've met tens of thousands of companies.
No, it used to feel like a big number.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Then we have $3 trillion budgets. And,
Thank you. You're reminding me. We're, you know.
I tried making it sound big, but thousands of founders, tens of thousands. You've created tens of thousands of jobs. Do the life, ethical, and business challenges decrease, stay the same, or increase as you climb the ladder of success? When you think of building companies, how should values be taken into consideration? And do you ever have to sacrifice values for business outcomes?
That's like a multi-pronged question, Moshe. So I'll try to tackle it with how I can, but I think Michael's right, as he alluded to. Being a $1 billion fund these days is not what it used to be. I mean, you look at Sequoia Capital; their first fund I think was about $5 million, and I think today they're managing close to $50 billion. And they were just announcing today, I don't know if you saw the announcement about how they're now creating and managing some of the public companies, and they literally, as a result of that, like the companies Sequoia Capital has funded, it's trillions of dollars, and it's like a massive percentage of total world GDP that the companies they've invested in sort of dominate. So I think it's very easy to stay incredibly humble and feel like you're underachieving when you're surrounded by people that have just such massive wealth. And then thankfully I'm happily married for 26 years, and my wife always keeps.
She reminds you?
Yes, she's always there to remind me on a daily basis. So that's great. I think for us as entrepreneurs, as investors, and with the entrepreneurs that we do invest in, I mean, one of the things we try to think about, and Michael's touching on Torah and obviously Moshe's background and my background. I think it's exciting that the three of us are Yeshiva University alumni, and we're trying to pave a way for the past few decades across Silicon Valley, Israel, East Coast, technology ecosystems. And I mean, I'm always amazed. I go to Israel. It's hard sometimes to find entrepreneurs that will go out for a board dinner or for kosher with me, and that's when I'm sitting in Tel Aviv, finding that kosher restaurant. And it's changed, but or even the fact that there are so few people that are Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut in our industry after this amount of time. I mean, it really is a very elitist, insular kind of group, and I think it's amazing and deserved that Yeshiva University and its alumni can hopefully break in and really make an impact. And to Michael's earlier point, do it hopefully properly. And by that I would say, listen, I'm proud of the fact, and why I've been with my business partner, David Blumberg, for the past few decades, is that probably one of our most preeminent concepts, themes that drives us is really tikkun olam. And it's pervasive in terms of the companies we invest in, the entrepreneurs we work with. When I went to my son's class when we were living out in Oakland, California, and when he was in second grade, and they were like, "Oh, what does your dad do?" And I talked about Rambam and the 7 forms of tzedakah, and like that's what we do. We try to give people jobs, and Moshe touched on it. I'm really proud of the fact that the companies we've invested in have created over 50,000 jobs globally. That's what I talk about. I don't focus on we have a market cap of 10 or 20 or $50 billion, but rather it's about job creation. It's about finding people jobs. It's about employment and trying to hopefully make the world a better place. So I think when you as leadership think about that when you're managing funds, and obviously Moshe and I at Maccabee Ventures, I'm sure Michael at Aleph, and my partners at Blumberg Capital, hopefully that ethos kind of bleeds down to the organization and into the entrepreneurs. And so it's in every which way it's thinking about, trying to give back and maintain sort of balance.
Great. Michael, talking about leadership, in your book, in last week's Parsha, Vayera, you juxtaposed Thomas Hobbes and Michelet on paradigms of leadership. First of all, can you expound on that for our audience a little bit? And then, which values do you wish were more at the forefront? And what are some key values that you're challenged with on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, before we dig into Vayera, I want to add something to the last thing I said.
Sorry.
When I was with Dean Wasserman, how long ago was that? 2 years ago? 2 years ago? I mean, I think I made the same point, but I'll make it to a broader audience here. When you grow up in a faith community, it turns out not just Orthodox Jews, and you go to shul every Shabbos, in our case, it's hard to be a failure. It's hard to walk into shul after you failed and maybe it ended up on a Facebook post or a Twitter or an Instagram or I don't know where. And, your innovation didn't work, your company didn't work, your company ran out of money, et cetera, and come to shul because everybody's turning around and say, you see so-and-so's son or daughter, and it didn't work out. That's hard, right? Unfortunately, there's an issue of Lashon Hara because there's a lot of gossip. And we often take the safe path because we're afraid to be called out for failure in shul, on Shabbat, and in our very tight-knit communities. And so those tight-knit communities and shuls that are a blessing can also turn into a curse when you're trying to get people to take risk and innovate and build startups and join the entrepreneurial economy that is higher risk. It just is. And so we need to make a concerted effort to embrace people who've tried. It's a good value in and of itself, not just in business. We have a lot of people who try. They try in school, and they may not be so successful because the normative path of school is not for them. They try to get it right. They tried in Israel. They couldn't send the base measures for so long, but they tried. And we need to embrace people like that. Turns out that those people end up with a lot of resilience when they get embraced and can turn into amazing entrepreneurs. If I told you how many of our entrepreneurs didn't take what we would call a normative path that everybody else's parents expects us to take, the number is high. And so...
Yeah, so that was a future question. My question
I didn't mean to jump the line.
That's okay. How do we operationalize that, though?
First, we operationalize by talking about honestly. Second, we operationalize it by, if you hear somebody ever talking about somebody else's kid failing, tell them to be quiet. Tell them that they're not brave and that this young person was unbelievably brave in doing that. We have this fear to stand up to people because they're critical and we kind of want to be part of the clique because it's easy to be a critic. Teddy Roosevelt's famous line, it's the person in the arena who matters because he tried. Paraphrasing Dante, by the way. But in the Inferno. But the critics, the people we hear all the time, tell them to be quiet. That's one way to operationalize it. The second way to operationalize it is initiatives like your venture fund, but saying to people, well, I'll make one American-centric comment and then I'll move on. But to the next point, which is you're all told that the cost of yeshiva day school education is high. Go get a safe job that pays you however many six figures out of college so you can pay for that day school education. And I got two answers to that. One is come to Israel because day school education is a lot cheaper. And you can go join a startup and not have to worry about that outrageous fee to send your kid to a frum education. And the second thing is, we need to have a conversation about that. You want to operationalize it if we want to make frum kids entrepreneurs and have an ability to impact the world, because to Bruce's point earlier, Sequoia is impacting the world because the founders they make is $50 trillion of market cap. Well, if we want our values to impact the world, we enable people to become startups. If they're worried about yeshiva day school tuition, they're not going to do that, and their parents aren't going to tell them to do that. And so the second way to operationalize it is to lower the cost of entry into the frum community. And we got to if you don't get around that, get out of the country. Come to Israel. You should do that anyway. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's tough in this setup.
And he's putting his money where his mouth is. Aleph has a whole program that finds Olim jobs, correct?
Correct. and a professional network for Olim who come to Israel. Thereafter called Nivo. You can look it up, Nivo Network. We got to start talking about this. This is like, we can't dance around it anymore. Time's up. The accounting jobs are going away. The law jobs are going away. It's all we have an AI company in accounting. We have an AI company in law. I'm sure Bruce has got one also, because there's 10 of them everywhere now. And so, we got to talk about this. And so your parents' jobs are not your jobs. Good luck.
Well,
You're going to need it.
I think we're here, and you mentioned it before. I mean, back when Moshe and I and you were graduating from YU, we were playing video games, and there would have been maybe 3 people in the room, and no one really at the front. So, to speak to them in terms of their experiences, and I would say not to drive people away from Aliyah, God forbid. I'm a big fan, but I mean, how many of you have actually been to Silicon Valley? I think that's really, Kanish, come on, you live there. That doesn't count.
Class trip.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's about getting exposed to that. When we all graduated from Yeshiva University, probably 90%, I always like the 80-20 rule, but I would say even 90% of the class were basically going to law school, working in accounting and med school. That's it, full stop. And I remember when I was working at a big law firm, making a lot of money, I was like 22 years old, and I called up my parents and said, I'm pretty miserable, I'm going to quit my job. And, my wife and I moved to Israel, and my dad was like, what do you mean, you're not happy? Like, what does that have to do with it? I swear to you, I mean, like, that was a quote. He was just like, you're supposed to be miserable. It's called a job. And I'm like, that can't be. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, we can have our cake and eat it. And I think that in this day and age, you guys, like, the world is your oyster. I think it's amazing. Whether you want to land in Tel Aviv, whether you want to land in Silicon Valley, especially in this distributed environment that we're in today, technology is the future. I mean, if you look back 200 years ago, 95% of the world were farmers, were working in agriculture. Today, it's less than 2%, and the productivity and output is greater today than it was 200 years ago. So technology is shifting. We're on this journey from, to use the metaphor here, from the George Washington Bridge to the Golden Gate Bridge, and we're basically just crossing the GW right now. So there's, in my opinion, this is, Alan Greenspan used to talk about, people would say, where's productivity coming from? Where's productivity coming from? It's technology, it's innovation, that's it. That's the next 50 years that's going to drive value. So I think you're incredibly privileged, while obviously it's challenging, growing up and going to school and getting jobs during a pandemic. But, the whole shared economy, this opportunity has never been, more profound. So, what's his name? Warren Buffett always used to say, like, he won the ovarian lottery. I think we've all won the ovarian lottery. We are in America today, or Israel, with an amazing education, so much opportunity. We have won the ovarian lottery. And so it's just, okay, what are you going to do with that ticket?
Dean Wasserman, why is there a Princeton Tech Trek to Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv, but not a YU Tech Trek to Silicon Valley and Tel Aviv?
Well, there is a winter trek that is going to be coming up to Israel.
All right.
We've thrown down the gauntlet.
There we go.
I like it. We've talked about this for years, and then,
And they're coming to visit you.
Deal. We're all welcome for Shabbat dinner. Anyone on it? We had the whole Princeton crew, 28 kids for Shabbat dinner. Everyone's welcome.
Book it.
And YU Israel Summer Internship Program, that's going to be doubling this year, so.
Awesome.
Excellent, excellent. Listen, we're all in the right place.
Amazing. Switching gears for a second, we've all been talking about, or in keeping with the Parsha theme of Sodom and Gomorrah, are we repeating the mistakes of our past? Social media networks as an example. When you invest in companies, how do you ensure that the technology is going to be used for good or the good of humankind? And does your investment process have a facility for that?
I'll try to jump in briefly, and Michael could contradict me and disagree.
That hasn't happened yet. We should get more of that going.
It's good, healthy tension. I like it. So
I got some things coming up.
All right, excellent.
I'll stir the pot.
We're back on the dating game. So, yes, I'd like to live on the Upper West Side, and I like potato kugel. So, I think that it's definitely challenging, with social media today, and I think, living out in Oakland, and some of you, know me and have been out there and stuff like that, and can know, we'd have dozens of kids over every Shabbat. Like, we were the Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut house. Kids would play ball, and we'd learn with them and go back to Mincha and hang out. And I'd always ask kids, like, and being in tech and being a VC, I'd say, well, what's the greatest invention of all time? And invariably they're like scratching their heads, the iPhone. I guess now maybe the answer would be TikTok. And what I would say today more than ever, it's Shabbat. It's just that simple. It's such an incredible I mean, most of us grew up religious, went to yeshiva university, et cetera, and we take it for granted. Living 20 years in the Bay Area, in my shul, there were maybe 4 guys that knew how to lane and daven and, were, volunteering and really like running things for, we had 200 families that belonged to our synagogue. And so I think, again, a little bit of a promote for Yeshiva University and how amazing it is. I mean, the 3 of us are back here. Hopefully that speaks volumes to our sentiment. But the education, the value, the beauty of what we get and what we can, take forward and sort of distribute globally is really unique and special. And we tend not to appreciate it, frankly, if you're living in Woodmere and you're living in Englewood and Teaneck or wherever, because, we're kind of a dime a dozen. But when I got to tell you, living in Oakland, California, and being on the Chaver Kadisha and davening and getting a call Friday afternoon saying, hey, can you lane tomorrow? There's literally no one in the shul, who can lane tomorrow. It was stressful, and it's nice not to have to do that today. But I would say it really gives you a sense of appreciation for how incredible Yeshiva University is, and for the ethic and integrity and values that we learned here, and which I frankly didn't appreciate when I was your age, just a few years ago. But I think that that's important, and hopefully we transmit that to our entrepreneurs. And for example, we don't fund gambling companies. We don't fund anything pornographic related. So we do have sort of a bright line that we try to adhere to, and we're not just focused on bottom line. I mean, we're fiduciaries. Our LPs, our limited partners, our investors want us to take the 200 million and turn it into 2 billion. That's what they want. They don't really want to hear excuses. They don't want to hear why we passed on this and that and the other thing. But hopefully we kind of bring those values, and if your partnership and your team have that value, and what I've talked a lot in our class is about mentorship. It's going to firms like that where, I've had some great mentors over when I worked on Wall Street, when I worked as a lawyer, when I've worked at startups, when I've been on the investment side, and having those sense of values that really drive you. So it's not just about, financial return. It's thinking about sort of that double or triple bottom line.
I'll
Disagree?
It's hard to disagree about Shabbat. Just wasn't our innovation.
Okay, sorry, we works.
So, you'll excuse me, I'll segue for a second into my book. We all think about Noach. You say, who's Noach? Noach invented an ark, right? And he saved the world from the flood. But Noach actually invents 2 other things that I think are more fundamental than the ark. One is he invents the plow. Chazal say that, but I think it's pretty obvious in the Psukim. I won't spend time on that right now. And you have the plow. And to Bruce's point before, there used to be a lot of people working in farming, and then we got automation on farms and less people work in farms. And same thing with Noach. You used to dig with your hand, and then you had a plow. And that unleashed unbelievable prosperity. And then humanity destroyed itself, not from poverty, but from prosperity. And trust was eroded, which leads to Hamas, which led to the flood. And then after Noach leaves the Teva at the end of the flood, it says that he invents what? Wine, right? Fermentation, chemistry, wine. Second invention. You'll note that this invention could also be used for good things, right? Wine is the water of the ancients, because especially after a flood, we now know this very well over the last year, there's no clean water after a flood. But wine is clean, so Noach invents it. But he uses it instead to fall into a drunken stupor and ends up being abused by his son Ham. And so here you have technological innovation, the plow and wine fermentation, which could be used for good or it could be used for bad. And so I don't think there's actually objective good and bad technologies. It's all a question of the value system we bring to these things. If you understand why Noach is called a tzaddik, but Avram is called a Nasi Elohim, that's the difference. The tzaddik is a tzaddik to himself, but it doesn't promote the values to the broader society for how to use his innovations, whereas Avram spread his message more broadly and took responsibility for other people. And so I don't think social networks are inherently good or bad. And for what it's worth, I'll take the other side of the argument, which is I certainly don't think they're any worse than the traditional media, the New York Times, CNN, Fox News. It's all the same. Really, really, it's all the same. In fact, I could even make the argument, I think, that because of the distributed nature of at least parts of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, it's better. And some social networks have come and gone because people didn't have a good enough experience and they went to a different place. It doesn't mean there aren't evils in them. There are. And so the real question is not is Facebook good or bad, is TikTok good or bad? By the way, I worried about it because I think the Chinese may control it. But is what we choose to use, how we choose to use it, how we choose to relate to the information on it, and what are we willing to do to get off of it? You cancel your New York Times subscription, you get off of Facebook, or both. You say, I'm not okay with the way we're talking to people on public news media. I'm out of here. I'll go do something else or start something else, or I'm going to be part of the cesspool. So it's really about us. It's not about them.
So that leads me to the next question. You know, our Talmud is replete with holy arguments back and forth, but at the end of the day, the rabbis, they married each other's, their kids married each other, and they were friendly. What has happened in contemporary society that has stifled or blocked our ability to share ideas and perspectives, the cancel culture, issues on college campuses, and what can you gentlemen suggest as a remedy for that?
Really? Cool. So I was thinking maybe Hunter Biden could marry one of Trump's daughters. That might really, you know, create some, ease some of the tensions and the stress. I know they're into art. You know, listen, I think it's challenging. We're so bifurcated. I mean, I think that's true in Israel. I always find I have two experiences in Israel when I'm in Tel Aviv in the tech ecosystem versus spending time with, you know, family, you know, in Jerusalem. It feels like it's a different country. The truth is the Bay Area and the East Coast, I always say there's nothing in common with living in the Bay Area and living on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which we do now, but I guess the commonality is, you know, politically there's some similarity, but it's gotten, you know, really, really bad. And again, I don't know how many of you have been exposed to it. I mean, I went to Berkeley to hear a lecture from like a Bibi, you know, 15 years ago, and there were riots, and, you know, he couldn't speak because it wasn't safe. And you know, it's, you know, really, really challenging, I think, you know, the world we live in today. So I think, and it's definitely dictated in Jewish law, and very much in any profession, it's just about, you know, Emor Ma'at Asher, you know, really just focus on listening. I think, you know, people have really become incapable of really listening or hearing other people speak. So those are my...
And what does it portend in a few generations from now if we can't have open dialogue on college campuses and they're being conditioned in a particular
That's why Yeshiva University is amazing. Honestly, it's just fantastic when you think about any other college campus in the world. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can suggest if there's any others, but I mean, listen, even NYU, Columbia, the Cal schools out west, I mean, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel sentiment is pervasive. I mean, I was speaking at a South by Southwest event in Austin and was heckled, and there were riots outside, and I was called like a Zionist pig for, you know, being an investor in Israeli technology. This is like 10 or 15 years ago. You don't get that every day in Tel Aviv, right? And so I think it's a really sad state of affairs that there's just a complete lack of, you know, respect, communication on any level. And I think, you know, our children are, you know, other than at Yeshiva University, are being completely indoctrinated and brainwashed at most of these college campuses. And they're in fear for their life. I mean, I mean, again, many of you have never been, but it's like you walk around, you know, Berkeley or even UCLA and just, there's rioting and you're afraid for your life.
By the way, public service announcement, sorry. If you haven't been to a college campus during apartheid week, you owe it to yourselves to go. If you haven't been there. And I'm not joking, I say that with all seriousness. And if you want to come with me to Columbia's Apartheid Week, I go every year. And I think it's really important that our community sees what's happening live and up close. Sorry for that.
I want to relate to something Bruce said and then come back to your question about this. Moshe just said, come see Apartheid Week. I think the question is, where are you? I said this to President Berman not long ago privately, but I'll say it publicly right now. Moshe's heard me say this. How is it possible that there is anti-Semitism on Columbia's campus, on Harvard's campus, on the University of Chicago's campus? I'm making that up. I don't know if there actually was there, but I assume there was.
DePaul,
and you guys haven't gone there. What are you doing? How is it possible that you were a university student in your 20s, late teens and 20s, and when there's something happening to Jews on campuses around, you don't get your butt on a bus, a train, or a plane and get there to support them? Don't watch it. Go do it. When we were in college, There was anti-Semitism in the USSR, in Russia. And guys like Moshe got on a plane and went. And when the Scuds came down in Israel, there were 450 Yeshiva University students who came to Israel. Candidly, I find it unforgivable to stay on YU's campus when this is happening to our brothers and sisters in campuses across the United States. The fact that you don't feel responsible for that, in my view, is a failing of education. I know everyone's saying nice things about YU. It's a real failing. The first role of a Jew is to stand up and take responsibility for other people. When Avram comes from Haran to Eretz Yisrael, he takes his orphan nephew with him. Family member, he's an orphan, he's obviously in distress. He doesn't wait on a living because his father's dead. And Avram says, I got it. And the Nefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, you read it, you got to do it. And so you ought to expect of yourselves that if you have an anti-Semitic incident in apartheid week at Columbia, haul your tail down from 186th Street or up from 34th Street and go stand up and be heard there and say something. Don't watch. And even if you got to go all the way to Oakland or Berkeley to go do it, you can do that too. We can afford this as a community. It's not the money. It's willpower, which comes back to the other point that Moshe started with. Barry Weiss has written this recently, and I totally agree with her. We've gotten to where we are, this divisive society, because of cowardice. We get out with courage. And so you have to be willing to stand up and engage in a conversation. And it's really painful sometimes. It's really painful. And it's really uncomfortable. And most of us don't like to get uncomfortable. But I got news for you. Entrepreneurship is really uncomfortable. And if you can't have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody who maybe vehemently disagrees with you or thinks your value system is off or God knows what else, you can't be an entrepreneur either. Because it's more uncomfortable than having the conversation. And so we get out of this by courage and by doing and leading by example and turning up where it's super uncomfortable. Turning up that even when people are shouting at you, to talk civilly. Turning up and saying, I really deeply believe in what I believe. I think you're wrong. I'm not going to scream at you. I'm not going to hurl things at you. I'm not going to curse at you. And that stuff actually has an impact, and particularly in a world where everyone's got cameras in their pockets and video cameras, that stuff gets heard. So stand up, get out, go do something. Sitting here writing op-eds for the Commentator, or still called the Observer in Stern, and the Observer is nice. Turning up in person matters a lot more. Start something. YUSSR was started by kids, not the administration. When they went to Israel and the Scuds, those were university students. They fought Dr. Lamb. They fought him. Well, we can't sit around and watch this happen. It's unconscionable.
Thank you. Two final questions. Over the course of your career in VC, what was your biggest mistake, and what did you learn from it?
It's actually easy, but it's in my book, so I should think of a second one quickly. I forced him to read the book.
Spence is killing me. Tell us.
We had a company that was, now it seems really obvious, but in the early days of digital photos, this is like right after film cameras started to slowly disappear. I invested in a company that was the first maker of digital photo books, which we now just call photo books, that everyone orders online with their digital photos. And we had the patents, we were the first one on the market, and we made one giant mistake of hubris on the business model. It was like today, where like money was spewing out of the spigots. This is the beginning of the year 2000, and we said, we got this.
Pre-March.
Yeah, this is actually December '99, and we said, all right, we're gonna build not just the software that does this, but we're gonna build out the printing facilities. And at those times, big digital printers were like really expensive, and you needed two because you had to deliver it quick. So we needed one in the center of the United States, and we had one in New Hampshire, and we hired a very expensive guy out of Fujifilm. That used to be a very large, not just film company, but picture developer
Isn't it fun to be the only people in the room that know some references?
Yeah, it's funny. Look it up. There's a Wikipedia entry for it for sure. And I also thought that I was really smart because my first real exit was a company called Picture Vision, which was the first guys to digitize pictures when they were still negatives. They did a negative scanner that you could kind of slowly paint it on a screen in 2 minutes and send it across the internet. In 1995, it would take many, many minutes if the line held up. Anyway, so this company, and you know, money was falling from the heavens like it is today, and it was going to require, I can't remember, $30 or $40 million to kind of roll this thing out, which today doesn't sound like a lot of money, but then was an outrageous sum of money. But we got it because money's falling all over the place and we're ambitious and this is a big idea. And then March 2000 happened, which is what they call now the dot-com crash. Then it was just called watch out below. And all the spigots dried up and we had to quickly kind of reorganize and say, oh, what are we going to do? And we had hired these people, et cetera. And we had a business in Japan and a business in the United States. So that was failing one, failing of hubris. We had a business in Japan, business in the United States, and we had 7 members on the board, of which most were Israeli institutions. Myself and the CEO was an amazing woman named Meg Weston, who lived up in Maine, was the CEO of Konica, there was Kodak, Fuji, and Konica. Those are the big 3 in photography at the time. And the board decides in a vote of 5-2, I lost, Meg and I lost, to close down the United States and focus on Japan. And I thought this was a terrible idea, but it got worse. The board then votes to take all the cash that's in the bank accounts in the U.S. and transfer it to the Japanese operation. And I said, well, we need about $500,000, I think it was, to pay severance to the people. And they go, no, we're a foreign company. And I was outraged, as was Meg. And we tried to stop it and didn't succeed. That's the failing I'll come back to in a second. I resigned the board immediately because that's what you do to not be legally liable for what you think are illegal decisions by the board of directors. Meg and I resigned. That ended up saving us from a lawsuit later, significant lawsuit later. But I think it was a terrible failing. And because the comment Bruce made earlier about kind of the bright line, I actually think God is in the gray areas. God lives in gray. In my book on Shmos, I described that the Torah tells us, where does God exist? Where do you hear the word of God? Nope, that's not in the Torah. That's about Eliyahu Hanavi. Anybody? It's a Mefurish Pasuk. Maybe, that we hear from the Shamayim, but in the post-Har Sinai period, it says, Me'ala kapores mi ben shnei akruvim vayidaber elav. What is Me'ala kapores mi ben shnei akruvim? Air. God exists in the empty space, not in the gold, not in the luchos. In the empty space you find God. And I think that's the gray area. God exists in the gray area. And this was a gray area, and I view it as a terrible moral failing that I didn't turn over every table and stop this from happening. And I carry it with me until today.
Thank you, Bruce.
I guess I'll be a little bit more simple. You know, there's the type 1 and type 2 errors. At the end of the day, you can only lose the money you invested. I mean, maybe morally you felt, terrible about the situation. But, to my mind, it's not such a big deal if you invest in a company and shut it down and you lose a couple $1 million. It's venture capital. That's our job. So, I mean, if you think about it, 2 of my oldest brothers are doctors. If you think about it that, if they see 10 patients and, 7 of them die, they're not going to be practicing for a very long time. But if as VCs, we invest in 10 companies and 3 of them are grand slams and 7 of them die, we're loving life. We're fantastic, investors.
3 grand slams, you're killing it.
Exactly. So, for me, and again, we've talked about this in class a little bit, we passed on Palantir on the seed round, we passed on Coinbase, we passed on Carta. So those are, Coinbase I think is worth $100 billion. I haven't checked it lately, plus. So those are painful investments because it's not limited where you just lost your, a couple $1 million that you made a bad investment in. It's, we would have made a couple of $1 billion. So those are always the painful ones. And Palantir as well. I mean, the lesson learned, I think it's really important. I would say product market fit is really where you sort of, the rubber meets the road and where companies kind of execute and win, and maybe spending more time around that and spending more time with not just one founder, which we did, let's say in the case of Palantir, with Alice Karp, who is the CEO, and if anyone knows him, he's a brilliant but eccentric kind of personality, versus maybe Joe Lonsdale, who's, a brilliant technologist, and we didn't spend as much time with Joe. And so, that sort of led us to Pass and some of these others. But, we typically, as investors, I'm sure Michael's similar, and I know Moshe's the same, we look at, 3, 4, 5,000 companies a year, and maybe we'll invest in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 new companies each year. So it's tremendous funnel, top of the funnel, and, we've got to make really quick decisions, with very limited information, imperfect information. And really, to Michael's first comment, again, you guys are too young to remember a company like Hotmail, but, he went to 24 VCs and they all said no, and it was Draper that said yes, and then he sold for $400 or $500 million and had a phenomenal return. So we're wrong more often than we're right, and so it's a strange profession, to be in. And my parents still have no idea. I actually told them I'm a doctor because they were just so disappointed when I quit my law firm. So I'm actually, technically, I was out in the Bay Area. I was at Stanford doing Stanford. I was doing cardiothoracic surgery, apparently. I was the head there for a couple of years, and my parents, if anyone runs into them in Jerusalem, actually, in the Pinsker building, I think so just the rabbi there. I know, he sits across over there, so I've seen, your dad. So just, please let them know that I'm still practicing as a physician, so otherwise they'll be, incredibly disappointed.
Bruce already segued into venture. I'll make one comment about his product market fit. This has become gospel, product market fit, and it's definitely true. You need product market fit. I think two underrated important points, both about entrepreneurship and this journey, are storytelling. Entrepreneurs need to be great storytellers, and business model. And I think if you look at a lot of what's gone on recently, people have managed to tilt entire industries by changing the business model. Lemonade from our portfolios. One example, Amazon's an obvious example. Airbnb is another great example. You can literally tilt industries by innovating that business model pretty hard. And I think it doesn't get enough focus these days.
Great. Final question, just to keep in time. We have a room full of students. What is the best way to prepare them for a future in VC or in the technology space?
So, I can't say it's my biggest regret, but I definitely do regret, when I was at YU that I didn't do the joint program with Columbia with engineering. I think that is a more traditional path. And, I took some, again, these are COBOL Fortran languages that, today basically don't even exist. So I took some, CS classes, but I think having that background in computer science, I think would, be phenomenal background. I really do encourage, especially if the objective is, heading over, to Israel ultimately, I think what makes you more precious and unique and invaluable there is having some U.S. experience, whether it's in Silicon Valley, which again is kind of mecca for the industry. Just again, put it in perspective, Israel's amazing, obviously, but California, and it's changing. I'm not saying it's not being challenged and changing, but represents about 50% of venture capital receptivity for the past 50 years. And if some of you aren't even familiar with Sand Hill Road and some of the names we mentioned there, it's kind of the Wall Street of Silicon Valley. And it's just incredible to have some of that experience, and then potentially that training, that mentorship, that experience, and then potentially go to Israel. I think Moshe was originally saying, hey, well, what do I tell my kids? The truth is, I only have 3. I don't have 14 like this guy. But the truth is,
Inflation already,
but I could tell my kids,
exchange rate.
but my kids don't even listen. So what's the point? So hopefully maybe here some of the students will listen. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on thoughts.
Michael?
I don't know the answer to this question because I'm not even sure how I ended up in venture capital. Learn Torah. I'm dead serious about that. Number 1. Number 2, get married young. To Bruce's point earlier. I actually think having kids young is also important because kids challenge us to love different types of people, new challenges every day, things you kind of have to adapt to. And I think that's a big part of my venture capital career. And I go back to what I said before. Get up and do something. Get your head out of the books. It's okay, right? Get your head out of the books. And you need to take responsibility for something other than yourself. Venture capital and entrepreneurship is about taking responsibility and owning it. Owning something beyond yourself. If you want to be a leader of people, and since this is a people business, because you need brains, it's a brains, these aren't factories. These are brains. That means people have to want to follow you. If people want to follow you as an entrepreneur, as a venture capitalist, and do business with you, you need to be able to tell them a story that they can corroborate. They need to believe that you're willing to stand up for what you believe in and you'll stand up for them, and that you're in forward motion doing and owning it, owning them and owning it. And if you're not willing to get up and do that when you're 21 and you got no responsibilities in the world other than a couple of grades, you'll never do it when you're 25 and you're 28. So get going. Don't wait.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Michael, for spending time with us. Bruce, thank you so much for what you do with me every day. I appreciate that.
Thanks for sharing the movie set with me. I didn't realize it was a movie star. It's like a big deal.
And I want to thank Dean and all the staff
Mandatory.
that's here. And most of all, I want to
movie.
thank the students who have made our past 4 years so far incredible. And we look forward to spending more time with you and growing the ecosystem together. Everyone, there is a free book outside for you from Michael. Enjoy. Have a great night.